Course direct, we make it simple. Mary will share something too.
Hello, everybody. Is everybody there?
Yes.
Yes, hi, Pastor.
Hi, Pastor.
I don't hear anybody. Y'all there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we're here.
Don't put it there for a minute.
Yes.
All right, we're gonna get ready to get started in a second. So we're coming down to the last couple of lessons, this one and next week in Proverbs. So we're gonna get started in a moment. So I'm going to share my screen. I would ask everybody for the moment to go on mute, and then at a certain point I want to ask you to come off of mute as we work through what I want to deal with tonight. So please mute yourself for now as we get ready to pray and get started. Okay. I think we got everybody. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you and we honor you tonight. We're grateful and glad to have another opportunity to study your word. We thank you so much for how you constantly love us, despite our actions and attitudes and behaviors and all those things that we all struggle with as human beings. But we thank you for being patient with us and never turning your back on us, and loving us beyond our faults and failures and frailties and idiosyncrasies and all those things. And so thank you for your word. Thank you in the context of tonight for the book of Proverbs. We ask that you would help us to see what you have planted in your word for us to see on tonight. We bless your name. Thank you for everyone who joins us tonight. And we pray that the word would fall upon good ground. We do ask it in Jesus' name. All right. If everyone would please mute yourself, and we're going to go into Proverbs. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. All right. Hopefully you all can see that. Everybody see that?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Great. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. You can come off mute and ask at any time. I don't feel interrupted if you come off mute and ask a question. I do not really watch the chat, and Pastor Bethia is there to assist me with that part if necessary. But if you have a question, just feel free to just come off mute and say, hey, I got a question. That is perfectly fine. In fact, I would love to have you to do that. All right. So we are going to go right into what I want to cover tonight. And the study of the collection of Proverbs is where we are tonight, and it is called paremiology. Paremiology is the study, and it's spelled in different ways, but paremiology is the study of the collection of Proverbs. Now, just by way of clarity, let me take you to this slide where we've covered in the very beginning the introduction, the prologue to the book of Proverbs. That was chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. And then we spent a little while, a couple of weeks, on the 10 messages that are in the book of Proverbs. That's chapter 1, beginning at verse 8, all the way through chapter 10 and verse 9. And you will remember that a lot of all of those messages are technically not considered Proverbs per se. There are 10 messages within the book of Proverbs, but the actual Proverbs begin now, where we are tonight, chapter 10, and it goes all the way from chapter 10 and there are different sections of the Proverbs. So the Proverbs of Solomon, the first section is chapter 10, verses 22 to 16. And then the second section is the words of the wise, chapter 22, verse 17, all the way to chapter 24, verse 34. And then you have the words of the wise, chapter 22, verses the words of the wise, and then you have Proverbs of Solomon again, chapter 25, verse 1 to 29, verse 27. The words of Agur, which is chapter 30, verse 1 to verse 33. The words of Lemuel, chapter 31. And then you have the godly woman, which is also a part of chapter 31. That kind of shapes out the entire rest of the book of Proverbs. Now, so let me start with the authors. So obviously there's Solomon, and we'll come to him in a second. But you also have this person by the name of Agur. Now, in a real sense, there is really nothing that is known about Agur. We really don't know who he is, don't know why what he said was entered into Proverbs. There is no information about this person, Agur, except that in Hebrew, the name means gathered together. Don't know what that connection is either. Does it mean that he gathers people together and gives them wisdom? Does it mean that he gathered some proverbs and people thought they were just wonderful and somehow it got entered into what we have now as the collection of proverbs? We have no idea. We just know that in Hebrew, the name is very similar to being gathered together. We also know that he is the son of Jacob, which actually means to be pious, to be carefully religious, which I think is a really interesting designation that if you start trying to infer some things, this man Agur's dad was the definition of his name actually means carefully religious. Like he worked hard to make sure that he was at least doing the right things. But that's coupled with being pious, being committed, being real in terms of his faith. Not perfect, as none of us are, and some of us treat each other like we're supposed to be, but none of us are perfect. None of us has it all together. Everybody makes some kind of mistakes. And we all got some kind of issue going on, regardless of what it may be. But this guy was pious, but he was also carefully religious, meaning that he lived it, and he also did whatever the ceremonial things were that he's supposed to do. Sometimes religion gets a bad name because it's an external kind of a thing. Religion is what you do, but piety is why we do what we do. So you can tithe religiously, which is really an act of taking 10% of your offering and of your income and placing it in the offering, as God says. But that's an act. Really, the question is what's behind the act. What's behind the act is obedience. I want to be committed to God. I want to follow what his word says. I trust that his word is the truth. And if he tells me that he demands the 10%, then I give it to him without question because he's God and that's what he said do. And I just got to trust and believe that he will bless me as a result of me being obedient to him. That's the pious side of things. And then the actual act is to take the cash, write the check, and put it in offering. So there's a difference, piety versus religion. But this guy seems to have both intact, which is what we should have too, because it could be considered as just religious to just come to church, to just come to the building, to just log on to a Bible study, to just log onto a live stream on Sunday morning. But piety is, are we living out all that we learned? Are we living out what we are expected to live out based on what the word of God says? That seems to be the case with this guy, Jacob, and he has a son named Hagar, who finds his way into the book of Proverbs. So we really don't know a whole lot about that. And all that I just told you, we can infer some things based on the little bit that we have. The next guy is Lemuel, which means belonging to God in Hebrew. And Lemuel's mother is the person who passed on the wisdom that we see in this book that comes from him. So if you were looking at Proverbs 31, chapter 1, verse 1, Proverbs 31, verse 1, it says, the sayings of King Lemuel contain this message, which his mother taught him. So everything that Lemuel tells us in Proverbs 31 is basically what he learned from his mom. So you have that. But then we do know that he is a king. That's also in Proverbs 31:1. Outside of those things, we know nothing about these two individuals other than they are some pretty significant contributors to the actual Proverbs. And Lemuel kind of, when you get around to chapter 31, the text kind of goes back into a narrative kind of a thing like we saw in the 10 messages. And that's where you'll find the Proverbs 31 woman. All right. And then you have Solomon. Now we do know quite a bit about Solomon. Solomon is a heavy hitter in the biblical text. His name actually means peaceful. It is a variation of the word shalom. Solomon, shalom. It's a variation, and shalom means peace. The text kind of goes back into a narrative kind of Solomon in Hebrew means peaceful. So we know that he becomes king, and we know that he asks God for wisdom. And what I think is one of the more spectacular passages in the Word. Matter of fact, if you have a Bible open and you take a look at First Chronicles, I think it's worth taking a look at. So turn to First Chronicles with me, and I want to read that out for you. And here's the thing with Solomon. He goes down he's a very well-known guy, but Solomon had a whole lot of issues too. And what that would suggest is that you can be really wise and ask God for the right things, but then you got to be careful about whether or not you use it the right way. And you start to, when you study Solomon, you'll start to see that kind of play out. So I think I said First Chronicles. I think it's Second Chronicles, chapter 4. And if y'all do y'all have that? Yeah, I know you're on mute.
Yes. Second Chronicles chapter 4.
All right. Where is it? First Chronicles. I'm sorry, First Chronicles chapter 1. I'm like Greg Barber. I don't have my glasses on tonight. Chapter 1, Second Chronicles chapter.
Okay.
verses
I'm
7.
gonna tell you in your notes, it says Second Chronicles.
Yeah,
chapter
Second Chronicles 1. I changed some stuff earlier, so Second Chronicles 1, 7 to 12. So on the night that God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask, what shall I give you?" Now, first of all, I always try to, ever since I've been reading this text, I always try to imagine what that would be like if God just stood in the room and say, "Okay, what do you want?" I mean, if God stands here and says, "What do you want?" That's got to be the most amazing question ever for God to ask me what I want, because my list would be pretty long. But and I would be in conflict with some of the stuff that we're going to read in a second in here. All right, so he says, on that night, God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask, what shall I give you?" Verse 8, Solomon says to God, after hearing that kind of a question, Solomon says, "You have shown," talking to God, "you have shown great mercy to David, my father, and have made me king in his place. Now, O Lord, let your promise to David, my father, be established, for you have made me king over a people like the dust of the earth in multitude." So this is what he asked for, verse 10. "Now give me wisdom and knowledge that I may go out and come in before this people, for who can judge this great people of yours?" So of all the stuff that he could ask for, he asked for wisdom to take care of God's people. Look what God says in verse 11. Then God said to Solomon, "Because this was in your heart, and you have not asked riches or wealth or honor or the life of your enemies, nor have you asked for a long life." I mean, stuff that most people might ask for. He says, "But you have asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may judge my people over whom I have made you king. Wisdom and knowledge are granted to you, and I will give you riches and wealth and honor, such as none of the kings have had who were before you, nor shall any after you have the like." That's amazing. He asks God for wisdom and not the other stuff, and God gives him the wisdom and the understanding and all the other stuff too. I think that's an amazing thing. So also, if you read in, let's see, First Kings chapter 4, 29, 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29. And it says, "And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart like the sand of the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the East and of all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan, the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his sons were 1,005. Songs were one, not sons. Wow. His songs were 1,005. Also, he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And men of all nations from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. He's a smart guy. All right. And so God blessed him with all of that. So we know that to be true about Solomon because we have stuff in the word about him. Also, we know that he is the third king of Israel. We know that he is King David, his father's chosen heir. And we also know that he authors Ecclesiastes. He is the author of Ecclesiastes. He is the author of Song of Solomon. And he also authors two of the Psalms, Psalm 72 and Psalm 127. We do know that he built a temple for God in Jerusalem. And we know that, again, his parents were King David by Bathsheba, who David obviously was never supposed to have slept with. But as a result of that union, Solomon was born. So that's what we know about the authors. Does anybody have any questions about the authors of the rest of these proverbs? If you do, you can come off mute and we'll try to answer it. Anybody? All right. Now, things to be on the lookout for. This is general stuff that we've been talking about all through the whole study of Proverbs. Just as we go into the individual Proverbs, here's just some things to kind of be mindful of, things to look out for. So comparisons are constantly being made. Remember that part of the ideology of a proverb and of wisdom literature is that it's built on comparisons, showing you two different things so that you can clearly see the differences so that you can then make the decision. Always remember that in wisdom literature, the thoughts continue to rhyme, not the words, but the thoughts will continue to rhyme. We're going to see that soon. We are always left with a choice to make. Always left with a choice to make. I try to tell people, and I tell specifically kids I work with on State Road, that every decision that you make has some kind of a consequence to it, whether good or bad. Every single decision, and not just them, but for us too. Every decision we make, to do this, to not do this, to go here, to not go here, to say this, to not say this, every decision we make will come with a consequence that somebody is going to have to pay. We are given the good and the bad. That is the wonderful thing about the Word of God, is that we're given the good and the bad. We get to see the blessings and the consequences. And once you see the blessings up next to the consequences, then you can make an informed decision about whatever it is that you have to decide upon. All right. So we get the good side of it, and you'll see this shortly. We'll get the good side of it and we'll get the bad side. And once you get the good and the bad, then you can go ahead on and make your decision. Whatever decision it is, obviously you have to live with that decision. And then you'll see that the same themes are repeated over and over and over again, over and over and over again. And sometimes stated in different ways, but the same general themes, particularly that we saw in the prologue, in the opening of the book, chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. You'll see those things that you see in chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. You will continue to see that theme reoccurring throughout the book. All right, so that's just a couple things to watch out for. So we're going to take a look at a couple of the Proverbs and just kind of see. Now, here's where, if you'd like, you can come off mute, because what I'm going to do, we're going to put them up on a screen and kind of dialogue about what they mean, what you see in the proverb, how you think it may apply to your personal walk, your personal life. So if you want to come off of mute as we go through this section, then you're welcome to do so. So we're going to start with chapter 10, verse 12. Chapter 10, verse 12. And it says, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. Now, what does that mean? Does anybody have any concept, any idea, any inkling of what that verse is designed to teach us? And again, you come off mute. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. Anybody? Y'all scared?
I'll take a stab.
All right, take a stab.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, so hatred stirs up strife. So you always tells us we'll see the good and the consequences, right? So if we choose hatred, there's going to be strife. Or we can choose to love, which will cover all sins.
Now,
won't even
what do you think strife? What is strife?
Evil or strife, like
Trouble.
Okay, thank you. I was looking for a word.
No, that's fine.
Strife,
No, you're on the right track. You're on the right track. So hatred stirs now, and hatred, believe it or not, in Hebrew has to do with the enemy. All right. So hatred stirs up strife. And so when I say what is strife, it's another way of saying contention. Somebody said trouble, discord. So when somebody's hating on somebody, let's use it that way. What what do they have the potential to be doing?
Causing conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, people that just, they can't stand other people, or these are people that often find themselves stirring up some strife, stirring up conflict, stirring up some discord. All right, and the Bible speaks heavily about people who sow discord, people who cause conflict within the body of Christ. All right, so now you see what's the comparison. Janelle, keep going. You're on the right track.
Okay, so
What did you say about love?
if you choose love, to love, it covers all sins, and I guess you won't even see the sin because love gives the, I don't want to say the excuse, but either you could cause conflict or you could choose love, which will help the person instead of like causing them conflict, I guess.
Yeah. No,
Right?
no, you don't learn it until you take a shot at it. So thank you for taking a stab at it.
Okay.
So yeah, so you're on the right track. So when you see love in Hebrew, it's really the love that God has for us. So think of it. How does God love us? Now, just think about that for a second. And this is for anybody, not just Janelle, for anybody. How does God love us? Well, don't we stir up some stuff as his children?
Right.
I mean, we good for stirring up some stuff, right? But the love that he has for us is not that he does not see it, but that he chooses to cover it. All right. And so what's the covering? It could be interpreted as in Hebrew, to keep it a secret or to forgive it. Man, what if we all got to that point where we love each other like God did? Do you know people who get mad or get upset and they run around and they talk to everybody except the person that they're mad and upset with?
Yes.
What do you think that causes? What do you think it causes? It causes strife. Whereas if we really are showing the love of God, then what does God do with our sin?
He covers it.
He covers it. He forgives it. That's what Jesus was. Jesus was the covering. His blood was the covering.
Right. Now, is that unconditional love?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the reason, that's a great question. And the reason why it's unconditional is because in this word love in Hebrew, it's actually the word, let me see, ahaba, Ahaba in Hebrew. And it is actually connected to an intimate connection with God, and it is the love that God has for me and you. And so you only need to, in terms of definition, you only need to think about how much stuff that we've done, thought, said, our behavior has he covered. That's a really humbling thing. Because if you can accept the fact that you make mistakes, and believe it or not, some people can't, but if you can, I know how often I make mistakes. I know how I mess up. It deeply disturbs me when I mess up something. When I feel like I'm a failure or something, it deeply disturbs me. But God covers my mess. Now, obviously connected to that is repentance and, confession and all those type things. But we have a God that covers. So hatred, and you see the comparison. Hatred is going to stir up strife, but love covers the sin. All right. Any comments? Questions? All right, here's another one. This is chapter 11, verse 14. And it says, where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. What does that mean? Where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety.
So, Pastor, could that possibly mean that if you do not have God in your life, that you may fail, and that if you do, you have safety?
It can.
I was looking at it like, how when we talk about it takes a village to, like to raise a child, that kind of a thing. I was looking at it kind of from that way. Like if there's a village, then there's safety. But if we're all, that's like what's going on now. But if everybody is separate, then that's when evil can creep in, kind of a thing.
Both concepts work here.
I was looking at it like you surround yourself with good people who give you good advice and good counsel. So if you're standing all alone and you think you know it all, you're not going to be successful. But if you surround yourself with people who can give you good guidance, then there's safety in that.
Very good.
I'm piggybacking off of Myra, and I'm thinking the counsel also relates to wisdom. If there's no counsel, people to instruct you, but people that are wise and God-led. And if you don't have those people, then there is no safety, because the advice that you're receiving is not wise, so to speak.
Exactly. That's good. All right. And see, and this is how you work through these proverbs. And as you look at them, just if you keep these in mind when situations come up, you have word with which to respond. So, wow, I spend way too much time in my own head.
Yes.
I spend way too much time talking to myself. Way too much time just kind of off on an island, exposed only to me. You know how sometimes they say people, your thinking is really stinking, and that's because we're not often around enough people who can give us godly advice. So in Hebrew, the word counsel literally means to manage. It means to it actually, the literal definition of it is ropes. And it's the picture of somebody who's like on a wagon, and the ropes are connected to the horse, and and as long as you manage the ropes, as long as you hold the reins, then you can guide where the horse is going to go. So it has to do with guidance. It has to do with planning. It's good advice. Where there is no good advice, the people are in danger of falling. And the fall just means to sink. And you can sink, you can crash. And it could be almost anything, any kind of an occurrence can cause you, if you're not exercising, good wisdom, it can cause you to crash. When it talks about counselors, so you have the word counsel there, but you also have counselors. So, and literally there are two different Hebrew words. The word counselors has to do with resolving stuff. It has to do with directing and devising and planning and consultation. Meaning what? You got to be around somebody or some bodies, some people who can give you not what you want to hear. If you surround yourself with people who will only give you what you want to hear, you will not be any better for it. If people really love you, they should be able to tell you to your face when you're wrong. And if you can't handle that, then you're one of those people that really kind of wants to be in a situation where you're not receiving any counsel except your own. And if you're in that position, then according to this text, you're in danger of falling. All right. So where there is no counsel, where there's no guidance, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, in the multitude of good advice, you're usually going to end up being safer. All right. And remember, these are truisms, so believe it or not, there are some people who get a lot of good advice, but if you reject it, then you're back on the negative side of things where you're in danger of falling.
Have to be open. You seek these good counsel, this advice, and you have to be open to it.
You have to be open to it. You have to be open to, because again, some people can fake it. And I know a guy who he constantly asks for advice from me and from a couple other people, and we all talk and say, you're always asking for advice. He doesn't do nothing we tell him. He wants the advice, or at least he acts like he does, but then he doesn't doing it. So you're right, Ms. Reed. You have to be open to receiving it. All right. Anyone else? All right. Here's another one. Chapter 11, verse 25. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself.
Part B is one of my favorite scriptures. And the watering speaks to being refreshed. So I think the whole scripture is kind of attached to sowing and reaping. So people that are generous will be made rich because they're giving, and people who encourage will be encouraged themselves because God will send someone to encourage them.
Okay. All right. Good.
Does that have anything to do with tithing?
It can.
Okay.
It can.
In the sense of that, if you give according to the way as God said to, that, you will be watered from Him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just pay close attention to the wording and keep in mind these are truisms. So the generous soul will be made rich. Does that mean that everybody who's generous is going to be rich?
You could be rich spiritually.
Yep. And you can be rich financially.
Right.
I mean, it's not that it's impossible to be generous and become rich. It is possible. But just because you are generous, does that automatically mean that you will be rich? And the answer is no. But everything after that comma makes a major difference. Right? So he who waters will also be watered. So you may not find yourself like rolling in dough. You may not be moving into a mansion next week or driving a Bentley tomorrow. But it's like, I think the truism here is that if you take care of others, you generally will be taken care of. And that does apply in tithing. It applies in regular giving. It does apply. All right. Anybody else see anything else in there?
When I look at generous soul, I think of that. That's basically just who you are. You just don't even think about, necessarily yourself. It's just something that you do naturally. You're a giver.
Now, where did you get that from? Why do you think that?
The generous soul will be made rich. Rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself. I'm thinking about the fact that God will always provide, or even, send somebody your way, or just he's a provider, as well as just also having that spiritual gift of giving.
Sure.
You just don't think twice about it. It's just something, you might be down to your last dime, but so and so needs it, so I'm gonna give it to them because I have enough faith to know that I'm still going to be provided for.
Now, the reason I asked you that is because the way you started out talking about that, I don't even, I believe you know exactly where you were going with that because the way you just explained it. But that word soul, generally when you see soul in the Bible, it refers to life, breathing. And what is breathing? Inhaling, exhaling. And what is breathing? What is inhaling? What is exhaling? It's living. So a person whose lifestyle is generous. So that's why I brought that up. Like, where did you get that from? Because that word soul magnifies the generous part and vice versa. So a person who's just naturally generous
Right.
is just naturally taken care of. That's the point.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, thank you. You did a great job with that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was kind of glad that you clarified it, but then in your summary of clarification, I got lost in that as well. Lost it again. So I'm just I can only speak for myself based on what Ms. Cheryl was just saying. She's saying that you do it automatically. You don't even know it. It's just second nature. It's innate. I can only speak for myself. I'm a very selfish person. And I've known that for a very, very long time. And so I consciously work on that all the time to give because it's the right thing to do. Trying not to think about, what it would mean for me or what it would leave me without. So I do believe, like Ms. Cheryl said, that it could pertain to the innate, the general, the person that's just, it's their nature, it's who they are. But it can also be for those that make a concerted effort at it as well.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But listen, part of your concerted effort, what the biggest issue or the biggest thing that I think is a blessing to what you just said is the fact that you know it. See, we did a different ball game if you're like, you're able to sit here in front of everybody on here and say, I know I'm a selfish person. You are way down the track on this to be able, because some people can't admit stuff. They don't even see it about themselves. So the fact that you see it says that the Lord is working on you, that you're getting better with it, that you're trying, that you're doing the best you can with it. And that's a part of being that generous soul. It doesn't mean that you have arrived. It means that you're on your way. And that's the blessing to what you just said. So when I was talking about the breathing part and all that, breathing is just natural. We all of us are sitting here breathing, and we ain't really paying attention to the fact that we breathing. I mean, unless you got some kind of respiratory issue, all of us are just breathing. And so the generosity becomes natural. And that was the point that Cheryl initially brought out. But even with people who have to work at it like yourself, Cheryl may be at one place, you may be at another place, I may be at a totally different place. We all can be generous souls, but it's in progress. So I commend you on even saying that, because that means you're well on the way. And because of that, I think you're counted as a generous soul, because it's something you want to do. I hope I didn't confuse you more. All right. Anybody else?
Pastor,
Yeah.
This is Mildred. Does it mean when you're saying generous soul that you will be rich? Does that just mean with money? Could that mean services? How you provide service?
It could mean a whole lot of stuff. So in Hebrew, the idea, there's a picture that's kind of drawn in Hebrew when it talks about being rich. Now, some of you are not going to like what it actually really literally means in Hebrew. So I want to warn you. You know how on TV, when you watch the news, they say, we're warning you, this may be graphic.
Right.
All right. So I'm going to tell you what rich literally means fat, F-A-T. All right. Everybody's quiet. It means fat. All right. Now, here's the picture that's being drawn. During sacrifices, because you remember in Old Testament times, even New Testament times, they did sacrifices. They did it with animals.
Right.
The animals that were the fatter animals generally we're considered to be the most healthy. And so the most healthy animals, in the minds of the people who were doing the sacrifices, there was a concept of prosperity based on how fat the animal was. So you remember when the prodigal son comes home, he says, "Hey, go kill the fatted calf. Go get the fat one. Prosperity. We can afford this. That kind of thing." So it's really an idea of being the generous soul. It's a generous soul that is made fat, that is healthy, that kind of has stuff. So it doesn't just relate to money. Sometimes it's a blessing. Like you may not be getting a whole lot of cash flow, but you may be blessed in so many other ways. And sometimes it is cash.
Okay.
So I think you're right. It's not just limited to cash. I think the idea is that if you are generous, because it could be your time. If you're generous in your time, if you're generous in your resources, if you're generous in your encouragement of others, then you too will become encouraged by, so it's a comparison still, but it does not have to be just money. It can be money, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
It's funny. I just was looking at something the other day about this tribe in Ethiopia, about the tribe of men who are the fattest men, were the women wanted to marry because there was something significant about their girth or their weight. It made them like the greatest or the most beautiful or whatever. So it's funny when we read about the generous soul or whatever, and you talked about fat being rich. But the beauty in us being generous allows us to gain more, not weight, but more wealth or more blessings or more positive outcomes because of our willingness to grow in this area of generosity. So when you said fat, it made me think of that.
Yeah. I mean, see, and it's cultural stuff. And what happens is that, the Bible is written out of a particular culture. And the challenge for us when we study the Bible is to try to figure out what did this mean in their culture? What are they hearing when they hear these things? And in a culture where fat is not negative, they see this verse totally differently. In our culture, fat is a horrible thing where nobody wants to be fat. Everybody wants to lose weight. Everybody go on a diet, so it does make a difference when you, and that's why I threw that part in. So you get an idea of what culture was like. It also has an idea, like when it says, who the person who waters will be watered himself. That word waters is very interesting too, because it means somebody who is willing to satisfy the thirst of another person in Hebrew. So people who just want to make sure somebody else is all right, somehow they're going to be all right. I love that verse because if we all learn how to just watch out for and provide for others, God turns that around and provides it right back for you. And there's story on top of story all through the Bible about how God does that. 11:27. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor, but trouble will come to him who seeks evil. Now that ain't a hard one, but what do y'all see?
So you reap what you sow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That passage right there seems like it go back to the 10:12 Patrick, hatred stirring up strife, but love covers all sins with 11:27.
There's some connection.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, some of these I put here strategically so that hopefully you could see that sometimes things are just said differently. The same message, these themes are reoccurring, but sometimes they're just said differently. And just notice the language of it. Earnestly seeks good.
That's what I was going to say, Pastor. Earnestly, also to me seems to speak to intent.
Mm-hmm. It can speak to intent. And what's connected to that is if you do something earnestly, and I'll just give you how the Hebrew kind of lays it out. It has to do with rising early in the morning. It has to do with a painstaking search. I get up early in the morning, and so I'm the kind of person I lay out everything in my head, and sometimes on paper, what I need to do for the next day. And I sometimes I get up early, and as soon as I'm up and moving, I'm earnestly after getting stuff done that I have on my list to get done. And man, when something interrupts it or changes it, it takes me a while to regroup and try to rethink through, so there is some level of intention there. I intentionally get up early because I'm intentionally going to seek after whatever it is that I need to get done on a particular day. You may have other examples of that, but what I'm trying to point out to you is always pay attention to the wording. Pay attention to the extra words that modify other words, adjectives. He who earnestly, and seeks is a major word, seeks good, looks for good, pursues good. And then what does it say? Finds what?
Favor.
Finds favor. And what is favor?
Blessings.
Yeah. Now, so, and I want you all to know, blessings is the word, is one of the words connected. But do y'all have any idea how much more is connected to that word favor?
I think grace.
You're on the right track. Grace is one of them. So
Mercy.
Mercy.
Opportunity.
Uh-huh.
Opportunity.
Yes. I mean, there's a whole lot that comes with this whole idea of favor. And it kind of starts with, God delights in those whom he delights, his people, his children.
God's love.
It's God's love. He even loves the lost. That's how we got saved. Because he loved us even when we didn't know to love him back or to love him for saving us. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor. And what is the favor? The favor is, as somebody mentioned, grace. It's kindness. It's favorably disposed. It's people that are under the benefit of God doing for us what we really don't deserve. Some people describe it as God's unmerited favor. So people who earnestly seek good, and by the way, what is the good? The good is virtuous stuff. It's doing what's right. It's moral goodness. People who just seek to live right. You just want to be a good person. People who are earnestly seeking that, they will find favor. But what's the opposite to that? Trouble. Trouble will come to those who seek evil. How much explanation do you need for that?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Or just a thought behind this, right?
Mm-hmm.
He who earnestly seeks good finds favor, right? If you always looking for the good in someone else, and just like you said, then God turns around, right? And I'm thinking about the comparison with one of these other verses, like that covers all sins, like love covers all sins, right? If you earnestly seek to find the good in a person, right, then it turns around that God does the same thing for you. But if you turn around and always looking, right, for the trouble in the person, then you're judged the same way. I don't know that. I'm just asking.
No, I mean, and that's why I said it probably doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, because if you just look at how the verse is written, it's shouting at us. You know, if you earnestly seek good, it's like you're gonna find it every time. If you look for good in another person, because sometimes there are people where the good is not evident, where it's not obvious. I go to court quite a bit, and one of the last times I went to court was one of the worst experience I had ever had in the 37 or so years I've been going to court. And so I go to court with this kid who is charged with a homicide. And the prosecutor, I'm asked by the defense if I could testify on behalf of this 19-year-old boy who has committed a homicide. I get on the stand and I'm asked by the defense a number of questions about what I know about this kid, which I do. But when it's time for cross-examination, the prosecutor gets and wants to know why I would show up in court to testify on behalf of someone who has taken someone's life. And, you know, I answered as best I could. But at some point, I think the prosecutor didn't know that I also understood the law. So when you're called to be a character witness, you say, well, this kid doesn't have any character because he killed somebody. Well, wait a minute. First of all, in the county jail, you're innocent until proven guilty. Because in the county jail, you haven't gone to court yet. We're actually on our way to court. So this kid is accused, but not convicted. So that's one thing. The other side of that too is I can only testify to what I actually experienced with this kid. I was not there when he did whatever it is that he's accused of doing. The only thing I've seen from this kid who's accused of a homicide is how he's interacted with me and how he's interacted in the program that I run. Those things I can testify to. I can say he's always respectful. He always does what I ask him to do. He never gets in trouble. He doesn't get in any fights. And that's the stuff I saw. I didn't see any of the stuff that he's accused of. And the court has to determine whether or not this person is guilty. So what am I actually doing? I'm finding the good in what everybody else sees as a bad person. Because the reality is, you may not have picked up a gun and shot and killed somebody, but some of us have killed people with our tongues. Some of us have assassinated people, you know, just with our mouths. All right. So as bad as we think some people are, there is good in everybody. I don't care who they are and what they've done. There is good in everybody. So every bad, quote unquote, bad person has some good in them. And every good person has some bad in them. And the truth of the matter is that all of us fall in both categories, whether we want to admit that or not. So he who earnestly seeks good, who looks for good, will find favor. Because I treated somebody right, maybe somebody will treat me right. Because I gave to this, maybe somebody in my time will give to my situation. You know, it's a lifestyle, as we saw in the previous verse, generous soul. He who earnestly works at it, earnestly seeks, looks for it, pursues good, finds favor. But if you're always looking for evil, guess what you're going to find? Matter of fact, you don't have to find it. It's going to find you. All right. Other questions? And we'll end on this one.
I just have a comment, Pastor. This verse kind of reminds me like when you're at work and you have those two types of employees. One who just wants to do their job and do it well. That's the one that pretty much will get acknowledged, possibly get the promotion. And then you have that one that's always spending more time trying not to do their job you know, trying to do the easy way out or do something crooked or slimy or something. And, you know, like you said, finding, you know, falling into trouble, getting fired, getting suspended, that type of thing. It just took me to work, finding favor, acknowledgement in someone else's eyes. So it's not always like a monetary thing, but just acknowledging you, like you just said about the gentleman, the good that you're doing what you're supposed to do, being responsible.
Sure. Very good. So I hope you all, and that was a good, and that's what these are designed to do. It's designed for you to make application to your daily living, to, as Erica says, what she sees on the job. These are designed to be tailored to your, and well, I shouldn't say tailored, maybe adapted to your situation. What are you living with? What are you dealing with? What's going on in your home? What's going on in your neighborhood? What's going on in your heart and mind? Whatever your context is whatever your reality is day after day, these proverbs can fit whatever that happens to be. And the more you study them, it's almost like having, it's like loading a weapon, being prepared just in case. So when life comes at you and brings you to negativity, whether it's at home, on the job, no matter where you are, if you're loaded up with the wisdom of Proverbs, you can keep yourself even keel because you now have the ability to fire back based on what you see in these verses. And again, we've only, look at the wisdom that we've seen, and we've only talked about 4 of them. There's a whole lot of them in the Bible. And again, they're not just for kids. It's not just for us to share with our kids. It is for that, but it's also for us to live by because we are God's kids. And that's the point of all of it. All right. Anybody else before we close? Any other questions, comments? Anybody else?
Real quick, I'm laughing over here because when we read this last one, I thought about my grandma, and she would always say, "Well, you get what you're looking for." So, like, you know, when you say you're looking for something, people sometimes we look so hard, we find the worst in people and we find the good in people. But, you know, it is about how hard we push towards looking for the good in people to see if somebody has the ability to be better than they are think they are themselves. And when we're searching for evil, we find evil. Like you just find it because that's what you're looking for. And sometimes we miss out on the best parts of people because what our intent is or earnestly seeking for is the worst in this person, as opposed to looking, as you said about the young man in the court. You're trying to see the good in that person and how God is using something good in that person too. So when you said that, I thought about that. And it's just interesting. Again, we're going even back to when we talk about an apple a day keeps the doctor away. These things are constantly coming back up again. These wise thoughts that we can utilize every day. And it is something that we probably need to, you know, keep a spiritual gun on our waist with these things loaded up, because it definitely need to shoot them on a regular basis.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else? All right, so we'll end it there, and what we'll do next week. That next week will be the last one, but we'll cover some more of these. And we're gonna do it the same way. I'm just gonna pick out a few, you know, of the Proverbs, and just kind of go through them and see what kind of wisdom the Lord has for us there. So, if no other questions, we will end there. And I'm going to start trying to pull out my list.
And check out these new photos showing the damage. The windshield shattered, the passenger side mirror.
All right.
So before Pastor pulls out whatever he's going to pull out, can we just come off and mute everybody at the same time and thank Pastor for just his diligence in this whole Proverbs series and for tonight. So I'll start. Thank you very much, Pastor.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Pastor. Great job as always, Doc.
Thank you, Pastor.
Great
Great
lessons.
Thank
Thank you for sharing your
Great
wisdom
lesson.
with us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Pastor.
much.
Great word.
You know, I'm hoping, you all get to see, because one of the things we want to do too is try to, and I actually want to get deeper into this, how we actually study. And I've never been, hold on one second. I've never been a big proponent of, all right, here's what it is, here's what it says. I want you to see how to find this stuff on your own. And so I want to, as we, we're going to transition to some other lessons when we finish Proverbs, but at some point I want to get a little deeper into how you actually study. I want you to be I want it to be like second nature for you. Like when you pick up the Bible, when you look at a verse, you know exactly what to do and where to go to unpack that verse without somebody telling you. To me, that's real study and that's real growth. And I want everybody to know how to do that on your own. It's nothing like being able to pick up the Bible and knowing what to do with it when you open up that, those passages. So, and that's what I'm attempting to do a little bit, trying to move towards that with some of this, to really, 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 when you read these verses, pay attention to the wording, because there's so much that's planted in those words. So, thank you all. Appreciate y'all listening, and certainly appreciate your encouragement. So I'm going to go into our prayer time. I don't know that I have the updated list today, but here we go. The standing prayer list: Monica Chase, Adelia Dancy, Tanya Boyd, Lorraine Coleman, Alice Clark, Clyde Graham, Robert and Margie Moore, Annie Terrell, Justin